Hi, my name is Abigail Arnder and I am a physician assistant student at Johnson & Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island, and I am graduating in 2018. And I just want to say I'm so grateful for this opportunity to get to share a story about a person I love so dearly, and that person is my dad. My dad had a birth injury. He had cerebral palsy, and he has since passed away. He passed away when I was 9 years old from a snowmobiling accident in Alaska. So I thought I'd use the people that knew him the best to share a little bit about his story. And those people are my mom, his wife, and my grandma, his mom. And they're just going to share about his disability and how he overcame obstacles and the strength and perseverance that he had. And I just love that I get to share about him. And in those short 9 years, my dad was one of my biggest fans. He was at every soccer game, cheering as loud as you possibly could. And now I get to be his biggest fan, and I truly am. He taught me so much, and I still get to learn from how great he was and how strong he was. And so I'm grateful to get to share a little bit about him. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Chris Yount Jones, and I was married to Mike Yount. And I met Mike years ago and didn't realize that anything was different about him. He was a sweet, romantic, kind man. And when we went out on our first date, I did notice that he reached for his wallet in his right pocket with his left hand, and I thought, well, that's kind of different. And we had Chinese food, and I remember asking him, he said that his mother and his sister were interested in special education, and I remember asking him, well, why? And he said he'd tell me later. So I thought, okay, I don't know what that's about, but you know, he was just a normal guy. And I did notice that he would, and my brothers noticed this too, the way that he shook hands, that it was a little different, and or that he would reach across the steering wheel to turn the key with his left hand because he didn't have the fine motor control in his right hand. I know that when he was growing up, he'd had surgeries because he, for a while with his cerebral palsy, had held his arm like this, and he'd had surgeries where you couldn't even see that, and even like to open up some of his tendons or something. So it just wasn't that obvious, but there were limits. I mean, he had limits of what he could do with fine motor control, and he was pretty amazing though, because he played basketball, he played football, he played racquetball. Of course, he played left-handed with his racquetball, but anytime he met somebody, he would ask, hey, do you play racquetball? Very social, very personable. So, you know, meeting Mike and meeting his family and understanding that he had been shaped by this disability, this cerebral palsy. And I remember telling his mother once that I don't believe that he would have been the man that he was had he not had CP. I think he would have been more brutish. He would have been kind of a jock, and he loved sports. But I don't think that he would have had the empathy and the kindness and the gentleness that he did with people who were challenged in any way had he not walked through having cerebral palsy. And I mean, I know that for a mother it could have been a grief and a hardship in some ways, but I love that he was who he was, and I think that the cerebral palsy helped shape him into the man that he was. All the years that I'd known him, it was like he could do anything. He could ride motorcycles, he could ride snowmobiles. He was an overcomer who just had, he had limits, but he really worked at overcoming those limits. And I mean, I never would have even thought to say, no, you shouldn't ride a snowmobile. So I don't believe that his cerebral palsy contributed to his death. I think that sometimes people think that people with cerebral palsy or any kind of disability have a second-rate life, but Mike had a full life. He had 3 children that he loved, and he actually, because I worked, he was the primary caregiver for them, and He loved them, he rocked them, he fed them, he took care of them, he drove them around so they'd go to sleep, and we had a loving marriage, and I think he had a good life.
Michael was 2 hours late in being born. We call him Mike because when I went in for my x-rays, the x-ray technician said, "I'm just not getting a good picture." So she took another x-ray. So I thought, wow, we're just going to have another great big baby. And so I went home and told my husband. And when it was time for the kids to be born, we thought we were going to have one big baby, and we went in there, and Mike was born, or Mickey was born, and then 2 hours later. But during the time that 2 hours was lapsing, immediately after Mickey was born, I told the doctor, "I'm going to have another baby." And he leaned across me and he shouted, "Mrs. Yount, you saw that x-ray. You know there's only one baby." And he told the sisters in the Catholic hospital to work on my abdomen to try to get the placenta to turn loose. Well, the doctor that I had truly wanted to come to be my doctor that night that the kids were born came into the room accompanied by the doctor who had delivered Mickey, and he listened with his stethoscope and he patted me on the cheek and he said, "You're right, honey, you're going to have another baby." And that was when we had Mike. Well, now that brought about, well, the next morning, the doctor that delivered Mickey and Mike eventually came upstairs to the ward, and he took my hand and he said, "Mrs. Yount, if there was anything wrong with your little boy, it would have been my fault." And I didn't know it, but at that time, Michael was in the nursery and he was under oxygen. And my husband didn't tell me, but he, of course, was cut short of oxygen, and consequently, he was cerebral palsied. Yeah. So anyway, Mickey decided it was time to get up and move, and Mike's watching, and she's just motoring all over the place, and she's walking and running, and he's sitting there, and pretty soon he makes his decision, and but see, he never crawled, and he never creeped. He always rolled wherever he wanted to be. So that was his extent of motor. So when he was able to roll over to the table and pull himself up, wow, that's pretty big. Then he started taking steps, and then lots of steps. But this is a kid that I'm trying to tell you was so determined that he was going to master things. He was such a tenacious little boy. And it was amazing to watch him grow. And we put him through much therapy. It worked. Something worked with this little boy whose handicap was, he was called a hemiplegic, left hemiplegic. He was put into glasses after his therapy. After 6 months, the doctor said these glasses would do better in your purse than they will on his face. And, you know, every step along the way of his life, we saw this determination, and we allowed him the opportunity to grow and to make mistakes and just to be there for him. His right hand was like this, and so they took part of his heel cord and put it in here so he could open his hand. And it's kind of like this part right in here. And then on his heel, by releasing the Achilles heel, where he could actually set his heel down. because it had been too tight. He walked on his toes on that foot. And then he was able to release it and learn to walk heel toe. That was done when he was about 18 months old. And for 7 years, he had pneumonia. And the doctor said he said, I want you to bring Mike to my office. I think he has cerebral palsy. And I'm going, what in the world is that? So I took him in and he examined Mike, and he said that he did in fact have cerebral palsy. He missed a lot of school at first because he had pneumonia, and of course the one lung was not as strong as it should be, and this neurologist told us that the cyst in his brain, where the brain matter should have been, was really just liquid, just water. So my husband and I used to think how intelligent this man would have been had this not happened, because he turned out to be a very, very smart man, very kind man, and it was like he grew a real passion for other people and their situations. He did learn some compensatory methods with various things. I remember one time he was getting milk out of the refrigerator. He's 9 years old now. And he said, look, Mom, and he was holding the glass and pouring the milk, and he'd never been able to do that before. It was always put the glass down and then hold the milk. And I said, how are you doing that? And he said, I'm concentrating. I said, that's pretty wonderful, son. But it just seemed like throughout life, as we, would mop the floors and Mike would spill the milk. And it was just one of those things, but that was a big milestone for us to see him achieve that. And so we had, some temper things to deal with and help him to deal with, which he did. And he became one of just a really kind, caring, and truly interested in people. I remember when he worked with some handicapped people for one summer, and he would come home, he'd call them by their first name, and he'd say, and today they were really burdened with this issue, or he's just really a compassionate person. And if I had to rate Mike's cerebral palsy involvement, we could say mild, moderate, and severe. I would say he was mild, perhaps bordering moderate, because I have seen what the deeply moderate to the really severe handicapped kids from cerebral palsy, and what their involvement is. And so I know that we were blessed that Mike was no more involved than what he was. Was so proud that he had a good life, and so blessed to be his mom.